Hello everybody, I'm Grandmaster Joel Benjamin, coming to you again from the St. Louis Chess Club, and this is my very last lecture as a Grandmaster in Residence at the St. Louis Chess Club, at least for this time around. And this one is games from recent events, and it's kind of interesting. It's the second one I've done tonight. I just finished up a lesson on the strength of the bishop pair. And the first game that I'm going to show from a recent event could actually appear in either lecture because it's an example of both. And it's the game that Ju Wenjun won in the last round against Alexandra Kosteniuk. In the Cairns Cup, which was recently completed here at the St. Louis Chess Club, and it was a pretty big game. Kosteniuk had a theoretical chance for first place. If she had won, it would have put her in a tie for first place with Humpy Canero, but she was playing the women's world champion who was out for blood after having a huge dip. Drawing a completely one position, 2 pawns up for nothing against Nana Zaganitsa, and then after probably a sleepless night, losing to 16-year-old Carissa Yip in a pretty sensational game. So here is the bishop pair in action, and this is actually going to end up being 2 bishops against 2 knights, and it's a Berlin defense. And it's, in fact, the Berlin endgame. Don't run away. This is going to be good. No, it's not always my favorite. I actually have a very good score on the white side of the Berlin endgame, but the reason is because I make sure to play it against, definitely against people who are not specialists in it. Because if somebody is really adept at playing the black side, it can be very rough. All right, white plays rook d1 check. One of the virtues of this move is that it forces black to put the king to e8, whereas some people like to move the bishop and then play king c8 and kind of fianchetto the king and connect the rooks like that. The downside is that you commit the king rook to go to d1, whereas it's sort of natural to play rooks to d1 and e1, and this actually is going to be a factor in this game. But you know, you can't see the future. You know, it's like you sometimes have to make trade-offs in these moves. So knight c3, bishop d7. Black's position is very flexible. There are many ways to play this. b3. I was never really a huge fan of putting the bishop on b2. I usually like to play h3 very early for white, with the possibility of playing g4. But anyway, she went b3. This is the fianchettoing the bishop is a thing that a lot of people do. But it does sort of start to set up these targets for black, which I'll say more about. But keep an eye on those pawns vis-a-vis the black light squared bishop. Okay. Oops. That's better. So after b3, bishop b7, bishop b2, rook d8. Funny thing about this game is that after knight e4, this is already a new position, which is really kind of shocking, considering that these moves are all pretty natural. But this whole combination of moves is new. White plays rook d2. Maybe white should have played h3, because I'm not so sure that it's that great for black to get h3, h4 in. In the game, it actually would have probably helped white quite a bit. But after rook d2, black offers a trade with bishop c8. And I think that white should take black up on that, because the rook on the d file is going to be very annoying. I don't like to let black have the d file. I'd rather have the king on the d file or have the bishop retreat. But Kosteniuk decided to keep pieces on the board, maybe because she really wanted to win this game as her only chance for first place. But now we see a very nice idea from black, rook h6. And I think the commentators were talking about how Nakamura had used this idea, but now we see that rook swinging around on the third rank and becomes a very, very effective piece. White plays c4, hoping to use the d5 square, but now you see this pawn chain is potentially targets for the bishop on c8. I talked about how you always have to look out for that unopposed bishop. And in the Berlin endgame, the light squared bishop is really the one that does the damage. Usually the dark squared bishop doesn't bother you, although it does in this game eventually. And often white could trade off that bishop with bishop g5 at some point, which, you know, in hindsight, maybe she wishes she would have done. So after c4, king f8. So that gets out of the way of knight f6. I think white wanted to play knight f6 and then bring the knight to d5. So Ju Wenjun sidestepped that. Rook d2, kind of an admission now that maybe she should have traded rooks earlier. So takes, and take back with the knight on, she actually took with the knight on e4, although it's going to end up coming back. So you see that white is losing time, and black is, my bad, that was not played. Black is going to get very aggressive in this position soon. Plays rook a6. Now, interestingly, the commentators had Garry Kasparov on, and he was talking about this position. He says rook a6 forces rook a1. Well, of course, it forces rook a1 to a player of Kasparov's stature. I think white should play rook a1. I think it's asking for it to damage those pawns anymore. But again, you know, Kosteniuk really needed to win, and maybe she felt like, okay, put the rook on a passive square. I've got nothing going. But this is a very, very serious weakness to the pawn on b3, and white is going to have to really be very active to combat it. So black gets aggressive with g5, and I guess this forces the knight really to go back to e4 because you need to make a square for the other knight. Knight comes back to d2. Knight jumps into d4. If white ever takes that will undouble black's pawns and also opens up some scope for the bishop. So the knight went to d4. And now knight c3. So that gives white some ideas of knight b5 or knight d5. And black somewhat played a little controversially the next moves. Probably just simply bishop f5, and you know, nothing is really going to bother black that much. That maintains a clearly better position. c6 is a little bit of a risky move because after c6 that weakens some squares. Knight c4, and then b5 is a move that ends up working out really well, but should have allowed white to equalize with best play. Knight d6, that was a good move. Black does not want to take that and give white that strong pass pawn, and then the other knight can come to e4, and the black position can actually collapse pretty quickly, so you have to, you know, keep that position defended. And after bishop e6, this is where white made probably the critical mistake. Not this move, but in handling these trades. This move is fine, takes, and now Kosteniuk needed to take this knight right away and play knight takes b5. And that wins a pawn, not necessarily giving white any advantage. Black could push that pawn to d3, still maintaining the two bishops and quite a lot of play. But white would at least keep a safe position. Most likely the game would end in a draw. A lot of pawns would be exchanged. So that was white's big chance. But you know, an interesting feature of the mistakes that she makes is that Alexandra maintains the option about trading for a move. And sometimes I see this kind of mistake from my students a lot, where they wait too long to make a certain decision, and so she waited on making this trade, but now when she has to make this trade, it's much weaker. The D pawn is less under control. The white pawns are weaker, and black is getting a lot of play, even down a pawn. Not really a great pawn, and black has the one pass pawn in the position, so it doesn't really feel like white is ahead. So rook gets the 7th rank, knight c4. Now, just a gorgeous, two bishops move, h4. This is really depressing news for white, because this is like, I'm going to be stuck on the back rank. The pawn's ready to come to h3, and that's going to be a permanent problem. So that was really a big move for black to get in, really on point by Ju Wenjun. And after king f1, h3. It seems like white would be better off playing g3 to make the h2 pawn harder to attack. But the thing is, after bishop d5, it's really hard to find anything to play. The bishop can come to g2 and f3, so the king is just not safe on any square, and that d pawn is going to be very, very hard to stop. So after h3, she tried taking it. Black took back. Of course, to make this trade, you want to put the king back on e1. And then bishop g5. This is terrible, terrible news, because the bishop is coming to f4. And that means that the white knights start getting into a very, very passive position. So the knight has to run back to g3. It also means potentially that e5 pawn is going to drop. But note that black is not in a hurry to take on c4 and take on e5 and straighten out those pawns, and then maybe white will be able to trade that a pawn and shrink the board. So there's no hurry here for black. Don't have to do anything just yet. She just pushes the pawn. And very depressing, because what can white do if black gets time? She's just going to bring her king in. So Alexandra decides to kind of make a break for it. The next couple of moves, first knight f1, king e8. It's a long way to go, but just starting. Knight b2, bishop f5 defending. And now knight g3. Okay, that beckons the pawn to advance, but you really don't want it to. King c2, and now a nice little snack here with bishop takes e5. Okay, threatening the knight. The knight has to go here. Oops, it does not take. So basically the plan for black here is that she wants to make sure that white never really accomplishes any kind of threat. So you play bishop f4, and you guard that pawn on d2, and white tries to do stuff with the knight, but ultimately unsuccessful. Knight f1, bishop b2, attack the knight. Well, white can't give up h2. White can't play knight to e3 because of d1, and the knight on f1 drops. So after bishop e2, what can she do? Knight g3, bishop f3, knight f1. Now a little check. Okay, so the king loses touch with the d1 square. Now she comes and attacks the knight again. Well, knight has to go to g3, otherwise h2 drops. And bishop f3. king c2. But notice that black gained a tempo. It's like every time this cycle happens, black will gain a tempo by checking the king away and then shuttling in. So after king d7, we see the writing on the wall. The king is just going to inexorably come forward. Knight c3, king c7. And at some point around here, Kosteniuk decides to make a break for it. Knight f1, king b7. Okay, just trying to time everything. b4, king b6. And so she goes for the d pawn, but she loses the h pawn, and that's going to be a very fast queen. So she gets a little bit of activity for a couple of moves with the knight. Knight d5 check, king takes b5, but it's very fleeting. King can go anywhere, but she decides just to end the checks. And in a couple of moves, the h-pawn will queen. And that's that. So a really nice win by Ju Wenjun, showing the power of the two bishops. White had just one chance there when b5 came, if she took it the right way. And other than that, it was a pretty dominant game for the player of the black pieces, Ju Wenjun. Okay, there are a couple of other important events going on. One that's getting near the end is the Prague Masters, where a lot of very strong grandmasters have gathered in the Czech Republic. But the leader of the tournament, pretty much wire to wire, Indian Grandmaster Vidit, just suffered an absolute debacle today. I talked about Ju Wenjun not winning 2 pawns up for absolutely nothing against Zaganitsa, but imagine if she had lost the game. And that's kind of how Vidit feels when you see what happened. This turnaround in this game, it's really quite amazing. So Vidit playing white, David Navara, who started off with too early, don't see it much anymore. Bishop f4, Vidit, which unfortunately didn't even get him the point, and people will be ready for it tomorrow, as that's how opening theory marches on. So he puts the knight on the side, I guess, to take that bishop, but maybe that wasn't such a good idea in hindsight. Knight c3, bishop e7. a6. That move looks a bit slow, I have to say. d5, ed5, bishop takes d5. And so now he cashes in here. Knight takes g3, h takes g3 and c6. Well, David Navara is waving the red flag at the bull, and the bull charges. Bishop f7, king takes f7, e6 check. Maybe he could have come back and given back the piece, so I suppose that white would get an advantage, as his rooks would be very good in the middle of the board. King takes, queen e2 check. Queen a4 was also pretty strong, I think. King f7 and castles. I don't think that black can hold on to the piece in the long run. Knight e5 check is a big threat here, which he can stop with bishop f6, but now knight e4 happens, and this knight is jumping into d6. Really nothing to do about that, so Navara gives back the piece to be able to trade queens. And okay, the material is even, but obviously white has a very big advantage in mobilization. So I guess the idea is that if white takes the pawn on c6, he can pin with rook c8. I guess that's his big idea. So king b1. Rook c8, white really trying to squeeze the maximum out of this advantage. king b1, rook c8, rook hg1. All right, so black grabs his pawn on a3. It's going to lose material anyway. Okay, white can take, knight check. Black gets gets a rook for 2 pieces. It's probably a pretty good deal, playing against rook against knight, gets some pawns. So, but white just doesn't go for it. Bishop takes a3, and he just I think takes one back. Knight takes c4, c6. Bishop b4. Black is really tap dancing to avoid losing material. White takes, knight takes, and then the rook comes into 7th rank. So he has he has a rook against the absolute 7th against the king buried on the back rank. Just a massive attack coming. You can hardly believe that black will even survive the next few moves. So h5, knight d6. Okay, the rook is plastered to the back rank here. So he plays rook a8, double rooks on the 7th. It looks like Vidit is just about to win a beautiful game, right? So rook e7, rook h7, knight e4. Okay, this is a killer move. The knight is coming to f6 or even g5, and those rooks are just going to devastate along the 7th rank. It just, seems hard to imagine that black could survive. So this is where you just get completely desperate and you just look for anything to avoid an immediate forced win. So he played rook h6 to stop the knight from coming to f6, rook takes g7, and rook d8. And this was very clever, because if he can trade a pair of rooks, his position is still awful, but the game's not over. However, the game could have been over if white had played rook f7 check, king e8, and simply guarded the mate threat. Because once he does that, there's no real good defense to the knight coming to f6. Black could try to defend that, but I think then white will be able to move the rook along the 7th rank and set up some other threats. For instance, knight d5. Knight g5 right away might be good, or you could play the rook away, threaten rook g8. If king f8, knight g5. Threatening rook f7, threatening knight h7. It just looks completely devastating. So after rook d8, he made a big mistake, that he allowed the rooks to be traded. He played b3 right away. And although white has big advantage, plus over minus, we say in the business, there's no mate or anything, there's no winning the rook, so black keeps playing, and somehow the more he plays, the better his position gets. Goes a5, white plays f3. Maybe white should just keep advancing the f pawn, but now, having failed at getting that forced win, he starts playing very carefully. So he brings back the rook to guard his 2nd rank, and now black starts to activate his position. All right, certainly white could trade rooks. Big advantage. He could trade rooks, maybe bring the king to a3 and a4. Looks very good. Might possibly not win, but certainly would never lose. So it seems like a bad idea to me that he avoided the rook trade. And it seems like he's just totally floundering in this position. Knight c3, rook to d3, knight to b1. What is he doing? Knight d5, making all these crazy maneuvers. Sorry, king c2, knight b4 check. So, okay, black is saying I'm okay with a draw. What are you going to do? Yeah. So White tries knight a3, knight e3, knight c4. I mean, this doesn't really look like a great way to play. Black has really improved his position on the queen side. A4, king c2. So now black is going for another repetition. And eventually white gets emboldened. The problem is that it's so hard to ever accept a draw when your position was that winning before. If you're just a little bit better and then you get to a drawn position, you can often accept it. But this Vidit could not accept, and he's gradually playing himself into a loss. And now he actually starts getting there by playing c5, which allows black connected pass pawns. So c5, b5, this really happened. g4, he takes. And white somehow thought he'd have enough counterplay, but black is too fast. His pawns are, how far advanced his pawns are. a2, g6, b3, c6. Okay, so I guess he had this idea that if rook b1, he'd go g7, and he'd be able to make a queen with check, yeah? It's like rook b1, maybe c7 first, I don't know. King f7, c7 takes, queen. Okay, but that didn't happen. Black said, well, I'm not going to just let you queen. And he played rook c2 because his pawns are already on 7th and 6th rank. They're going to queen by themselves. So rook c2, rook f1. All right, trying to cut the king off. But now the rook guards it from behind, and the king takes care of the other pawn. c7, king d7. That's it. I haven't had a chance to read about this yet, but this is one of the most epic collapses I've ever seen. I mean, white was so amazingly winning. And this is a very strong player, rate over 2,700. I can tell you that I don't know if I've ever really lost a game quite like that, but I know that I've done more along the lines of what Ju Wenjun did in drawing that ending 2 pawns up for nothing, and it's really just the worst feeling in the world. And it turns the tournament upside down because Vidit was the leader, but probably I haven't seen the updated scores. Somebody may have caught him in the 8th round. That certainly changed things a lot. Okay, so the last game that I want to show you is from the Aeroflot tournament, which just started up. They've just completed 2 rounds, and one of the more interesting games that I saw from the first 2 rounds was a game won in the 2nd round by Rauf Mamedov against Vahap Sanal, a player I'm not really familiar with, but his rating is 60 points higher than mine, so I'm going to say he's a pretty good player. So Mamedov is black in this game. So it starts out kind of slow. It's interesting that Mamedov plays this double fianchetto because I think that's like a great way to equalize against a higher rated player, but he is going for symmetry against actually his opponent is not that much lower rated than him, but nevertheless stuff gets generated here. Knight c3. Now black decides that he's going to play a little bit more defensively with d6 rather than d5, and allows white some presence in the center. I believe he took with the queen. This is kind of what they call a hedgehog formation, more or less. And finally, black lashes out a bit with e5. So he wants to run white through with this pawn. All the way, very aggressive run by the e-pawn. Now the engines say that white is probably best off playing f3, which might be good for an advantage, as the pawn got away to e3 but didn't achieve any open lines. So take first, ask questions later is where we went. I mean, it's not necessarily bad for white, but black has enough compensation because of the of all the weak squares on the king side. Remember, around white's king. So black is doing okay. Knight d5, and now the engine says knight g4 is strong here to keep this knight on the board, and with all the knights jumping into good squares, white can actually run into some trouble on the king side. You know, those pieces can be very strong before the knights get to exert any power. But he played bishop takes d5, which allowed bishop takes f6, and white is okay after this move. Knight comes to e4. And now queen takes b6. This is not a losing move, but it's a very risky move. White really didn't need to take that pawn. It would have been better to maybe keep his queen on a better defensive position. Although I guess he wanted to cover the diagonal, but if he plays, you know, something like queen f4, then he could get maybe get black to retreat the knight, or if he plays bishop f6, cd5, then at least black can't, or probably isn't going to play knight c3 here because of the bishop. But in the game, it's a little dicey for white. He's still okay, but now he has to make some accurate moves. And he played king h1, which was a good move. And after king h1, rook takes e2. Okay, pieces are gathering around the white king. I would be a little bit nervous if he plays rook e1, offering a trade. So the queen comes in. Now black is, you know, move or two away from mating if he gets to take the knight. So white really has to do something. I think knight g2 would be the most accurate move, and the computer says that it's equal. And also, equality is available with the move that he played in the game. But now he played the wrong move with the rook. But I think the right one was not so easy to find, because apparently white should play rook f1, which is a funny looking move to me because black can take this knight. If white takes back, queen e4 is mate. But apparently white has a move which more or less equalizes the game, or maybe even gets an advantage, because black finds that he's not able to hold on to that piece that he just took. It's a weird kind of move, a combination of attack and defense. Anybody see what white might do here? I mean, I know I looked on the computer, but if I were playing white, certainly if I were short of time, I don't think I would have foreseen it. It's queen e3. It's a funny looking move. It guards e4, maintains the attack on the bishop, but the weird thing is, it's also got this idea of queen e8 check. And I don't know what you do with the bishop. If you play bishop g5, you actually get mated here. Yeah. So it seems like white would have a better position actually after queen e3. Very strange. But white didn't see that. He played rook c4. So he's trying to drive away the queen and cover the e4 square, but he did not succeed in either of those things, because the queen just didn't move. The bishop came to d4. So he succeeded in not getting his knight taken, but he still got problems with queen e4 and back rank problems after that. So bishop d4 happened, and, well, more or less has to take the bishop. He could give a check with the queen, but after king g7, he still has to take with the bishop because he didn't have any good way to avoid mate. So takes, knight takes, and now at this moment, white is doing okay in pawns, but that doesn't mean that he is a good endgame, because his king is in a lot of trouble, and because of that, he's eventually going to start dropping things. So the knight takes d4, white takes a pawn, so he's ahead for the time being, but check. He has to play king g1, knight g2, queen b1 wins a piece, so he has to play king g1. He gives a check, then he plays g5. So this is the problem. The knight can't move. Knight g2. Black has a choice of how he wants to do this. He can mate with the queen coming to f3, or he can mate with the queen coming to e2. Very fundamental. So after g5, then the knight can't move. So white has to do some tap dancing here. Queen h6, he went to pin. He went check. I think it's possible to take the knight, but he decided not to even do that, because the knight actually still can't move because the same problem, queen f3 check, and that annoying d pawn has been removed. So in queen h5. And then he has a lot of things he can do, but he made perhaps a surprising move. He decentralized his queen, but with white having this problem with the knight, he can't stop black from eating pawns. And so the surprising upshot of the game is that black wins by basically queening his a pawn. Queen takes the pawn, and king e3, and he just retreats the knight. Black king is perfectly safe, but the white knight is under attack. Queen e2. Okay, black can be a pawn up, but he decides to be 2 pawns up. It's not really that important to trade queens. Probably more important to get this past a pawn going. a4. I believe went to f5. Okay, queen e5. He has queen b2, so that's not going anywhere. Queen e4. Check, king a. He played h5, and that got a resignation. I guess g4 is a big threat. If h3, he could play g4 and knight g5 check and take the queen. So that was interesting, a little bit weird game. I like games with exchange sacrifices, I have to admit. And there were some weird tactics at the end. That rook f1 would have been a very unusual save. with the Queen E3 move. I think that would have been, pretty hard to find. But he managed to, he managed to do it. He didn't manage to find the defense, and after Rook C4, Bishop D4, that the game was pretty much over. So just 2 rounds down in the Aeroflot Open in Moscow, and so a lot more action to come in the next week. The Prague Masters tightening up. Sam Shankland is in that event. He started with a very rough loss in the first round to Vidit, as the player that we saw with that horrible debacle. But Sam has played a lot better after that, and he had a bunch of draws, and then he won a game, and then he got back into it. Let me see if I have that game. No, I do not. So. All right, so I think we'll just end it there. So that's with the Cairns Cup ending. The Prague Masters is the biggest tournament coming to an end. Aeroflot is just starting, and after that, in March, just like a week and a half, the World Senior Team Championship will be starting up, and I'll be playing on the American team as we attempt for a three-peat in the 50-plus division. We're fortunate to win the gold medals in 2018, 2019, and we have 2 new players on the team. We've managed to convince Gregory Kaidanov and Larry Christensen to join the fun. So we're actually getting together a lot of the old Olympic team with me and Shaba and Larry and Greg and Igor Novikov being our 5th player. So I'm looking forward to that tournament. Hopefully bring back some hardware, and of course down the line, I think starting right about when I get home, is the candidates tournament. That's going to be very exciting, and they're going to do live commentary from the St. Louis Chess Club for the entire tournament. So that should be a lot of fun, and I know that I'll be following that. So again, big thanks to St. Louis Chess Club for bringing me out here. I really enjoyed my time, and getting to do all these lectures. I always like to try to pay forward what I've learned in chess, and glad to have that opportunity. So thanks everybody out in cyberspace for watching. Thanks for my live audience, and I hope sometime in the relatively near future to come back out here to St. Louis to do this again. Hopefully also to come out here to play in some U.S. Senior Championships. But it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me, and good night, everyone.